Welcome to another YouTube Live here with myself and Coach Laura, or Coach Laura and myself. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. In the middle of summer, so I guess life is a little bit more enjoyable when the weather is warmer. I know we always talk about the weather, but it's just our reality, right?
It is, yeah, no, not mustn't be not long until you head away to your cabin.
Yeah, and this the end of the week.
Oh,
So
exciting. For 2 weeks,
yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah, so that'll be
Very
awesome.
cool.
How
Nice.
about you? How are you doing?
Well, I got back from London today, but nonetheless, I'm excited to talk about our 10 lesser known fat loss tips today. And I think some of them, or I think many of them, we've probably like touched on here and there in previous lives. But nonetheless, I think all of them are not the first thing that people think of when they think of fat loss or weight loss per se. And when we're talking about, or when we say weight loss, we do mean fat loss because our goal is that our clients lose almost only fat and no lean mass. So that is the main goal. But one thing in particular that we actually spoke about a, a little bit, at least last week in our live, was postprandial walks. So by postprandial walks, we mean going for little walks after you have had a meal. So that means after your breakfast, after your lunch, after your dinner, after your actual meals. It doesn't have to be after your snack, but even if it is 5 to 10 minutes, even if it is standing, the research shows that your blood glucose regulation is a lot better than if you're sitting down right after or you stay seated after a meal. And yeah, I know that you're a big proponent of that as well.
Yes, yes, I am. And just like you, when the research started to evolve, it was like, oh, this is something really, really simple. Not always easy, depending on where you live. However, it is something that is really simple to start to incorporate, and it can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used to say, or people used to ask, does it make a difference if I get my steps or my cardio or whatever in one go, or if I split it up? And of course, practicality is always the most important thing. So, if you don't have any other way of getting it in one go rather than splitting it up, by all means, that's better than not going at all or than not getting your steps in. But nonetheless, like we were saying, newer research is coming out or has come out specifically in regards to blood sugar regulation. And while it might not make 100 calories of a difference in a day directly, whether you split it up or whether you get it in one, it is actually like going to help you just simply have less cravings, be more satiated, and be more focused throughout the day if you're able to regulate your blood sugar better.
Yeah, and as you said, it takes time. This isn't an immediate thing that's going to kind of be noticeable directly on the fat loss phase. However, over time, it just becomes something that you do, and it's something that you enjoy. So I want to, kind of maybe put that little caveat in there. It's not something that's going to be immediately noticeable, but over time, it will be.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that has become very popular in the recent years or month also is the little continuous glucose monitoring devices that many people experiment with, or some insurance companies nowadays they pay for them if you're curious about, or if you're wondering what your blood sugar regulation looks like specifically, because more people have type 2 diabetes, or they might be insulin resistant, etc. So those things, those little devices can be very helpful. And if you're curious about like how to do walks or my activity post meal actually affect my blood sugar regulation, I really do recommend giving those things a go for a little while just to see how different the effect might be. So that would be the first of our 10 lesser known fat loss tips. Yeah, maybe you have another one that comes to mind.
Yeah, well, I did have one this is a little bit more nutrition based. It's when you incorporate your meals, it's let's focus on eating your protein and fibers foods first, and then move on. Again, it depends on the dishes that you enjoy, and we are talking about specific fat loss tips. So this is something that I like to offer as a suggestion as well. It's even when you're eating out. So let's prioritize. I'm going to eat my protein first. I have my salad, have that, and then you can move on to the other foods. And the reason for this is that you'll feel a little bit more full at the beginning of your meal, so that you may not overindulge on some of the more higher carbohydrates, higher fats kind of food, and that kind of helps along again consistently over time, that can help.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that plays into our first point really nicely because having that protein, having those fibers, that fiber first is going to also have allow for a better blood sugar release than if you have white rice on an empty stomach and
Yes.
then you eat your chicken or whatever. So I really like how you kind of tied that in there. Um, the next one that I'm going to bring up is actually very different to those two and doesn't seem related to this at all, and for me, that is using visual aids in order to keep that person that you're trying to become, the with your goal weight or whatever in mind, or even your goal physique in mind, to have more visual reminders of that. And sometimes we laughingly talk about that in the sense of putting a picture up on your fridge, or having that as like having your idol as as a screensaver or whatever. But actually, those visual cues are huge. And it doesn't have to be like a specific person or even your your old self from a few years ago that you're trying to get back to or so. It can even just be like a beautiful meal that you created, like a lovely salad on that's on the fridge, that might prevent you from going to the ice cream drawer or something like that. Or it might be something on your phone that's saying like do your best, or it might be a sticky note on your bathroom mirror that says make mindful choices, or like whatever it is. But the more, or like, we're also stuck in our day-to-day robot mode. We're just like, I need to go here, I need to do this, and blah, 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 blah. And before we know it, we might wake up in the beginning of the day and like fully motivated and um, thinking we're going to stick with our plan and I'm going to execute everything I set myself out. Well, then it's 10 o'clock, the motivation has sunk a little bit. Then it's 2 o'clock and your coworker comes around with those donuts and you're like, ah, I really want one, but you say no there. And then it's 5 o'clock and you come home and your neighbor brings you a cake and whatever. Like, so there are so many deterrents from that vision that we have at the beginning of the day. So that it's so helpful if we have several reminders throughout the day in various places where it's always like, oh no, let's get back to where we actually want to get to. Let's get back where we want to get to, because our normal environment and the social media, TV, and so on, it's all trying to deter us from being that best version of ourselves. Even that, if that's not a direct fat loss tip, I do think that that can make a really big difference.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and I like to tie this into that feeling. Like, how do you want to
Mhm.
feel when
Mhm.
you have this vision for you, or you have this intention? How do you want to feel? Maybe it isn't a necessarily physique. It's more, I just want to be able to run around in the park with my kids, or go for a bike ride with my husband, or whatever it is. It's that feeling of the accomplishment with getting there, tied with that specific. Maybe it's a phrase or a picture. And something that I've also recognized for myself and with my clients is kind of rotating those visual cues, because once you see the same thing, it just, you don't even recognize it anymore. So it's rotating, putting something new, having something new every couple days that is both inspiring and motivating, and again, really tying that to a feel good feeling.
Mm.
that that over time is, even if you're temporarily feeling that feeling, you get to experience that positive, keep saying feelings, the positivity behind it.
Yeah, the positive state of mind, or even just, yeah, the notion. No, totally. I like that point because, as you say, like things blend so easily into our background, and eventually we don't see them anymore. Just like if we have a reminder for something on our phone and that's always coming up, we're like, yeah, okay, ignore that type of thing. No, I love it. It's the next point that I have is again, a little bit more when you're already in that fat loss phase and you might be struggling to stay on point, mostly because of hunger or because you want to feel more satiated. And those tips are a little bit more and perhaps controversial, but things like carbonated drinks can actually help you feel a little bit more satiated. So like carbonated water or diet sodas, perhaps the stevia or something like that. Even sometimes like decaf coffee, it makes you feel a little bit more fuller. On that same notion, things like gum. And I say all of these with the notion of in moderation, because people tend to take it too far. We see it that if you're in your dieting phase, and I've had like people chewing 2 packs of gum in a day, and then you don't even realize that, hey, first of all also has calories. Second of all, you're ruining your gut. You're so bloated and gassy from all that stuff that you're consuming in like diet sodas and 0 calorie syrup and whatever. I mean, like, if you use it in moderation, it can be a helpful substitute for a full calorie syrup over your pancakes or protein pancakes that you like to have on the weekends with your family or so. That's what I mean. But nonetheless, if it's in the afternoon and oh, I should probably wait with my snack until 3 p.m. because I've already consumed so and so many of my calories, but my stomach is a little bit growling. Maybe do grab that diet or that soda water and squeeze a little bit of lemon in there, and then it might just be something to zip on, so you have something in your hand and you feel like you're kind of keeping your stomach a little bit busy. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And you can make a tea and like a cold tea. There are lots of different. I actually do like the carbonated water hack, if you so to speak, especially in the afternoon. If you're out and about, it's something easy that's transportable. You keep it in
Yeah.
the fridge and bring it along with you. So yeah, I like that tip. Again, there could be some controversy, and this is very person dependent. If you have some major gut issues, we would say maybe not, but generally speaking, it could be helpful too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I touched on like protein pancakes or something to have with your family. And that was going to be my next point of making your favorite treats lighter. So sometimes we're like so used to having something like pizza on Friday nights with our family, or something like, oh, I love to have ice cream on movie night with my kids on Saturday or so. And a simple hack can be to make those lighter, and I keep saying that, but you're so great at doing that. For instance, like everyone else is having pizza, maybe regular pizza because they love it and they're not in a dieting phase, but you want to be part of that, so maybe you can make a cauliflower crust pizza. I will say that there are people that are like, nope, I'd rather have just one slice of regular pizza, like none of that healthifying stuff, and I'm happy with that, or I'd rather have like the real deal pasta. I'm not one of those people. I actually, I'd rather have a bigger bowl of like chickpea pasta um with the lighter cheese, or like, yeah, cauliflower crust pizza, and maybe like 3 slices with a lighter cheese or something like that. And yeah, you make like a great protein ice cream, or you've made some great protein brownies, and like simply doing that can be really helpful for our mindset, because then we're not so like, oh, I can't have that. I need to wait until I'm done with our diet. And you're simply lightening up and actually improving the nutritional profile of a food that it might not taste one to one like the original, but again, like I'd take the 80% taste of that for the maybe half the calories, or like a third of the calories in this instance.
Well, I'm the same, and I will also say that it took time to get there. Like if you're new to this game, and even if you just start, like you mentioned, having maybe a third of the portion of the pasta that you normally would, and then having the rest with riced cauliflower or zucchini noodles, it does take time to kind of get to that point. However, when you kind of get there, you kind of start to crave those foods, and the more foods that you can line up, and I do like this challenge. I see it more as, "Ooh, that looks really good. That looks really good. How can I twist this to make it a little bit more healthy?" So I'll put in protein powder and replace with some of the flour for protein powder, and then using canned pumpkin as opposed to the fat source and all those sorts. So I see it more of a challenge. And can I make this? Because sometimes it doesn't work out, but then I'll keep trying. And again, it's like cinnamon buns are my all-time favorite. So how can I kind of get that taste? And I will indulge sometimes, don't get me wrong. It's more, how can I do this on a more regular basis? Because that over
Exactly.
time, again, we talk about consistency all the time. Doing something like that over time, it gets to be easier. You have it on hand. You know how to, you know, curate those meals, and then you enjoy it as well. And then when you go for the quote unquote real deal that you have once in a while, a few things might happen. You might think, oh, I love this. This is so rewarding, and it just tastes that much better. Or you might recognize, oh, the way that I have been doing it is actually much tastier. So
That
just be
and
curious.
usually more satiating also, like, for to your example of, like, the zucchini whatever, mixing zucchini pasta with regular pasta or so, it adds food volume, and oftentimes when we're in a dieting phase, even just, like, looking at your plate, the visual effect of, like, "Oh, I get to still have, like, a proper plate size of a meal," as opposed to just, "Oh, this is my dinner, okay." Like, for me, that makes such a
Yeah,
big difference, even just the
it does.
visual thing.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. That does make a big difference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and another thing that came up for me when I was like trying to put some notes together for this is, sometimes people want to start a dieting phase when they have nothing, like things are actually quite relaxed and they're not busy enough. So they think about food a lot. I actually think that dieting is easier when we're reasonably busy. And I don't mean stressed, because stress in and of itself is not very helpful for dieting either. Like if you have your biggest dissertation or thesis or whatever in your life to write, you're probably not going to be performing cognitively as well if you are in a steep caloric deficit. Um, and then if you had your maintenance calories. But at the same time, if you're on vacation and you think, oh, vacation's a great time to go in a calorie deficit, and all day long you're thinking about food, and maybe reading a couple of books, not great. On the other hand, if you're like, okay, I'm busy, I'm getting the kids to school, and then so that means I can fast a little bit in the morning, it doesn't actually feel hard, and then I'm sitting down at my desk, I have a nice little breakfast, but then I'm actually like occupied work wise with all my chores, and it doesn't, like, it just feels easier if you are more, like, if your day is not constantly free to think about food, and then you scroll through Instagram and so you see all these great recipes and blah blah, so you get even hungrier. So yeah, one point that I want to make here is just like keeping busy in various ways. It could also be doing some gardening, or keeping the house tidier or so. Simply keeping busy helps us stay distracted from too many food thoughts.
Yeah, and I like to tie on to that, like the routine around it. So you typically have breakfast at 8 a.m., you have lunch at 12, even if it's on those
Mm.
more busy times and the less busy times, having that meal consistency at those times, that helps too. So, kind of it's to your point, it's okay, so I'm in a busy season and I'm going to go into a fat loss season, I'm going to be more at rest. Keeping that consistency of the routine, that will help too.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually also wrote in there, like, having your food pre-planned. So you mentioned having your routine in terms of times, and I love that, because also we basically train our body to be hungry at a certain time and be satiated at a different time. But yeah, just having your food pre-planned so that you kind of like in a satiated state, ideally, maybe after your dinner, you sit down and you think about what you're going to have the next day, or maybe even on Sunday what you're going to have over the week, as opposed to in the moment when you're hungry. You get home from a long day of work and you're like, oh, what do I want to eat? And you open the fridge and you want to eat everything and as much of that as possible. But if you've got it pre-planned, and ideally if it's like simple, you don't want to have super fancy meals that are incredibly palatable, so you want to eat more of that, but instead keeping it simple, keeping the taste simple so that you appreciate each food as it is. Um, and you don't have to think about it in the moment. You literally, open up the fridge and get out that meal, or you just literally start preparing because it's breakfast time and you have your oats with protein powder or whatever it might be. Yeah, I personally find it very helpful because it also allows more thinking space for work, or for family engagements or so, or things that we actually want to be thinking about and not constantly contemplating about food.
Yes, this has been really helpful, not only for me, but for a lot of my clients. And again, it's a progression to get there. I had a client who was, making all these elaborate meals for her family, and she was just stressed. I was like, well, make it as simple as possible.
Mhm.
And over time, she's like, wow, I didn't realize how much time and energy and stress I was putting into this. And my family, they like the meals that I'm making. They can add a few things, and it's actually simplifying and less stressful. So pre-planning and eating some of the regulars is just, again, it decreases that stress, which also in the end, as we know, helps to facilitate that fat loss.
Exactly. And I mean, that doesn't mean that we can't try a different recipe on the weekends or every now and then or when we're going for the meal out and really making a mindful choice there. But we're just talking, 80-90% of the time
Yeah.
sort of thing. And yeah, the other 2 points that I had written down are some that we already touched on. So one of them, keeping stress low, because if we are very stressed, our cortisol is going to be higher. And most of the time, we're going to be craving more carbs and just more food overall because our body is like, hey, this is like not necessarily I'm in danger, but like I need that extra energy to deal with whatever you've got me going on. Or like even if it is a cognitive challenge or cognitive stress or emotional stress, but we're gonna be craving more food. So beyond our calorie deficit for sure, normally actually in a bit of a surplus. And so making sure we're doing things that help mitigate that stress, like breathing techniques or meditation or even just some of those mantras that we said, and just generally learning to deal with your stress in other ways other than through food. So it might be calling a good friend and talking about your stress, or might be when you come home from work and you've had a busy or stressful day, go in for a walk. You're so big on those transitions, and I think that's so key. Like, you come home from work, you can't just expect to drop whatever was occupying you at work, or in worst case you are working from home. So you need something to take that stress off first instead of gravitating towards food to offload the stress, which doesn't really work anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, especially the transition piece.
Yeah, and like on
Yeah.
just on the meditation part, I just want to say that it can be really short, people starting really, really small. It can be as little as closing your eyes and taking 3 deep breaths. It can be closing your eyes, thinking of 3 things that you're grateful for. And I do think there are some great meditation apps out there these days that offer like 3-minute meditations, that offer free trials and so on. And it just helps a little bit with consistency, because like with everything, it's something meditation is not something where you're like, oh, I'm feeling blah, 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 stressed and so on. As a remedy, I'm now going to meditate. Meditation works more in the sense of prevention, right? So we want to catch it before it gets to that point. So doing it on a regular basis is going to help you to get to that overloaded feeling. So that's just one point that I wanted to throw out there when it comes to the stress management. And the other thing that we did already kind of touch on was also focusing on really satiating foods. There is actually such a thing as the satiety index, where foods are kind of rated in like how satiated they make us feel. So things like we mentioned oats, potatoes are really up there on the list as well. So if for those of you terrified of carbs, it's not carbs per se that are like simple carbs or easily processed, and but it does really come down to the sources as well. So great grains like quinoa as well, or yeah, like I said, potatoes, sweet potatoes, super satiating foods. And if you think about those, even just the way that they look, like 200 grams of potatoes, or let's say 30 grams of carbs from potatoes, is going to look different in your stomach and be processed differently in your stomach than if you have that from a slice of bread, which you can squash easily and is very, it doesn't take up much room in your stomach. And of course, vegetables even more. If you have a plate of 30 grams of carbs from vegetables, that's going to be like a whole bowl full. And that takes up the same space in your stomach initially before it gets processed, versus 30 grams of carbs from, yeah, like, again, slice of bread or so. Not saying bread generally is bad, but if we're in a dieting phase, also those more satiating foods tend to have more fiber. Of course, there's also things like egg whites, or tend to be higher in protein. So one or the two, and both fiber and protein require more energy when processing. So their thermic effect of food is higher than with those other things. And so therefore, that's how it helps in fat loss per se, to go to our original question.
Yeah, I like that you laid that out. And I mean, if you circle back, the basics pretty much. If you if you've been following, it's like fiber, protein, keeping
Yep,
things simple, and decreasing your stress. So, I mean,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah, and then one of the other ones I still wanted to mention too is actually something that we talked about too, which is not eliminating the foods completely that you enjoy. We gave you some options that you could do instead. So, for instance, light making something lighter, like again, if it's a brownie or chocolate or whatever, learning to incorporate that in moderation is the other method, and just not going into the route of like all or nothing, or this is clean, this is dirty, quote unquote, and instead just, yeah, again, practicing moderation, practicing having those things in smaller doses. I think that's very helpful because many people get stuck in those weight loss circles or cycles, and because they have that over restriction, and then they binge, and then they over restrict, and then they binge because they fully deprive themselves of something. And then lastly, one big point that I want to make is just doing your weight loss with someone together. So that can be your best friend, or it can be a coach, it can be a group, just that extra accountability and knowing that you're not alone in that. So even sharing like, "Oh, were you this hungry today also? I really struggled. I almost went for that second donut or whatever." And you're like, "Oh yeah, man, I feel you. I really like today was tough for me." Or not this week, but last week when I was on my period, man, I was craving this and this and that. So just it makes you feel heard, it makes you feel seen, and even just in the sense of exercise or like anything, it's so great to have accountability and of course additional guidance too. So having a coach by your side is even more valuable. Of course, I'm biased in this being a nutrition coach, but yeah, if you're listening to this and you're looking for a little bit more extra accountability, do feel free to message us.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm just going to summarize those 10 points. So we've got postprandial walk, so going for post meal walks, so to speak. Then having visual reinforcement, so sticky notes, pictures, just making sure you're curating the or consuming the right content on social media and so on. Very, very helpful. Um, Using carbonated beverages or gum or decaf coffee and things like that in moderation to keep you satiated, to keep you from cheating on your diet or eating more than you should. Um, Making your meals simple and planning them out nicely. So you gave a great example also of having the meal times right. Then lighter, making your favorite meals lighter is another method so that you don't feel too deprived over your fat loss period. Keeping busy, but not at the same time not being too stressed, kind of finding that sweet spot so that you're not constantly thinking about food, but at the same time also not wanting to grab food to deal with your emotions. And focusing on more satiating foods, focusing on protein first, on fiber first before you have these other things, and just generally not eliminating those things that you enjoy entirely, but again, learning to fit them in moderation. I hope I touched on all of them. But yeah, is there anything, any last words of wisdom you would like to add to this list of 10 lesser known fat loss tips?
Yeah, no, I think these are really good tips. I will just say, start with one thing and see how it works
Mm,
out. Right? Like let's not be bombarded. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't make things more stressful for yourself. Just keep it as simple and basic as you can and then see how that goes and then start layering things on after that. And it doesn't there's no particular order. It's whatever. Okay, so that seems really attainable for me right now. I'm just going to give that a shot just to see how it goes.
Perfect. I love that
Yeah.
advice. Thank you for adding that. And yeah, if you're listening to this and you have any questions or any other topic recommendations or so for us, then please leave us a comment. And thank you, Laura, for contributing to this chat. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Lisa. Take care,
See you
everyone.
next time. Bye.